I have actually been looking forward to doing this talk. Um, it's very, even though I talk about various topics that seem to be obscure, very little known, this is a topic that is hardly ever discussed. And it's interesting because Plethon is so important to world history. And yet, when I teach my world civilization class at the university, in the textbook, I don't think even mentions him once. And yet, when I go to various symposium with various symposia with various scholars and so forth, they'll mention Plethon. They'll talk about him, but they don't like to talk about him because he's an anomaly. And even though history is made out of oftentimes the exceptions to the rule, um, Platon is an enigma. No matter how much you try to pin him down, you just can't seem to capture him. And that makes it difficult. Uh, George Gemestas Plethon, he lived from 1355 to sometimes they say 1452, others say 1454. While while often declared as one of the most original of Byzantine thinkers, he is also one of the most shrouded in mystery because of his very controversial religious, really controversial religious and political views for his time. He seems to be somebody who is living outside of his time. And I must add, he's still very controversial today for so many because he always thought outside the box. In fact, his thought process is often viewed as radical, even by today's standards. While officially in belief, Plethon was Greek Orthodox. He merged his mystical faith with Greek philosophy, especially Plato and the Neoplatonists, Jewish cabbalistic philosophy, Zoroastrianism, the Chaldean Oracles. In fact, in the latter case, dedicating himself to the veneration of, well, various gods like Zeus and Hera, yeah, and Poseidon. What? So you hear this and you're going, wait, wait, this is somebody who's from the 1400s talking about the gods of the Greeks and Romans? What is going on? But it must be declared that although Plethon lived the majority of his life during the twilight years of the Byzantine Empire, in the late 14th centuries, what happens early 15th century, um, he is one of the most important figures, and I must add, one of the most inspirational figures of the Italian Renaissance. You know, that humanistic movement that was to transform the Latin West. Yes, you heard me correctly. The Italian Renaissance. As a friend of Cosimo de' Medici, Platon became the main inspiration for founding the famous Platonic Academy in Florence, changing the philosophical landscape of the Renaissance and, of course, Italy forever. In fact, this academy was officially dedicated to him. Plato not only had admirers and friends in Italy, but students and even a school inspired by him. He inspired some of the greatest Renaissance thinkers of the age, including Marsilio Ficini and Pico della Mirandola, either directly or indirectly, and also through his followers. His philosophical contributions would go on from here into the Latin West, restoring Platonic thought, inspiring the Hermetic revival, forging the Renaissance magical tradition, articulating humanism, and changing our world forever. Very rarely is so much inspired by one single man. and I bet most of you have never heard of him. Now, it is fair to say that much of his early life, raging up to his first 50, are still uncertain, with a sparse bit of information here and there. Let's go to the first image. We do have an image of him later on in life. You see this crowd scene. This crowd scene was painted by Benozzo Gozzoli of Florence, who lived from 1420 to 1497, who knew Plethon. It's in the Magi Chapel in the Palazzo Medici. But take a look. Let's go to the next image. You get a zoom of him. So this is what Plethon did indeed look like from somebody who did know him, contemporaneous to him. I like his crown-like hat there, right? Now, it is rather unfortunate that we know so very little about his early life. One thing for certain, however, is that we learn early on that he angered many within the Orthodox Church. And it is rather unfortunate still that we learn so much about the early years of Plethon from someone who viewed him as a rival and a heretic. Next image. And so wished to join him, or to judge him, as he recorded his early life history. We are, of course, talking about Gennadius II Scholarios, who lived from 1400 to 1473, who was a native of Constantinople and was trained in philosophy by the monk Cortosimenos, also known as a mathematician and astronomer. When his teacher died, Scholarios went to study, or at least sit in, various lectures by Plethon at Mistra before becoming the theological advisor for John VIII Paleologos, the emperor of the Byzantine Empire at that time, where he assumed the position of great authority. Eventually, Scholarios became the Patriarch of Constantinople from 1454 to 1464. But that was actually following the fall of Constantinople to the Ottoman Turks. So what happens is when the Ottoman Turks took over with the fall of Constantinople in 1453, who do they put on the throne of Patriarch? It happened to be him. So there you have it. Let's look at me for a little bit there. So Plethon and Scholarios often fought in writings that have survived to this day. While Plethon favored Plato, you can guess where we're going with this one, Scholarios favored Aristotle. Still, Scholarios was in a position to learn all about Plethon's background, employing spies to learn everything he could about this suspected pagan. He writes, this is what Scholarius writes, "It was apparent to us for a long time what sort of man he really was. And we were also aware of his working on such a book at diverse times, for trustworthy witnesses have given us their accounts of it, and we obtained much and undisputed evidence, first when we were in the Peloponnese and then in Italy." Of course, this is could be referring to the laws, the nomos, which goes into Plethon created a new religious system. It could be also referring to some other works, all which Scholarios viewed as, well, heretical. Many of the Byzantine hierarchy were suspicious of his very long stay, of what his rival Gennadius Scholarios described as the court of the barbarians, which was either located, next image, at Turkish-held Bursa or Adrianople. And you see right here, you got on one side Adrianople would be Erene, there. And you see on the other side, you see Bursa right there. So these are two of the places that Plethon may have gone to. And see that little piece right there in between of the red where Constantinople is? That's what's left of the Byzantine Empire at this time as the Ottomans are slowly moving in. And of course, by 1453, Constantinople will be conquered. Although there are pockets too, this is various states where Greece is, there are pockets of the Byzantine Empire in the Peloponnese in that area as well, but that does not long survive its fall. Anyway, so Plethon went to one of the two locations, for there is a direct reference to the word owl in connection to where Plethon resided, which could either mean capital or palace. Now, this court was, of course, that of, next image, of the Ottoman Sultan, Murad I, who was in charge from 1362 to 1389, who desired to surround himself with intellectuals and men of good culture. The very fact that Plethon would invest his time amongst Muslims, most likely the decade of the 1380s, cast much suspicion on him. And here he's leaving, the Byzantine Empire to go and seek knowledge within the Muslim realms of the Ottoman Empire. Now, the sultans were established at Bursa from 1326 to 1366, and from there moved to Adrianople. But Plethon still could have been at Bursa, since the city was still both a political and intellectual capital for the Ottomans. I favor that he was here rather than Adrianople. Let's go to the next image. The city was also very Greek friendly. These are some pictures that I have from the city. Next image, around 1423, there I am, hi. A certain Bertrandin, a spy of the Duke of Burgundy, arrived in Bursa and described it as a very fine commercial center, the best city belonging to the Grand Turk. Next image. With the majority of the population still Greek at the time, enjoying the luxurious caviar with olive oil. Next image. Bertrandin further notes that at Bursa, there are very nice places like hospitals. In 3 or 4 of these, bread, meat, and wine are distributed to those who want to take them in God's name. So you got this free social system where if you're hungry, taken care of. Next image. And of course, there was also a large, fine castle located here. He says about 1,000 houses inside. Now, which certainly fits Scolaris's definition of an ale, a giant palace. Next image. Also, Bursa was specifically known for its esoteric studies. By the way, these pictures here are remnants from the Roman and Byzantine Bursa, but the Ottomans simply accommodated those buildings and built around them or on top of them, or reused some of the materials, or just simply kept them preserved. So it was a good relationship between the Greeks and the Turks when it comes to Bursa. Next image. Now, I mentioned it's a center of learning. There is, for example, there's a famous Sufi named Al-Bistami of Antioch, who chose Bursa as a place where he would study, quote, the science of letters and divine names, and was known to later be a teacher of Sheikh Bertrandin. And so you have this. Even more significantly, next image, Al-Bistami was a serious devotee of the Neoplatonic philosophy of Ibn Arabi, addressing his circle as the Brethren of Purity, which matches in many ways the circle of the Brethren, known as the Frators, connected with Plethon later on in his life. And so there is this connection again to a mystical tradition, a Sufi mystical tradition that seems to permeate into even Plethon's understanding of his own views. Next image. It must be stressed that such an intellectual pursuits of widely different kinds were not only tolerated at the Ottoman court, but were encouraged, which contrasted widely with the Christian courts of Europe. For while there's a diversity of beliefs were permitted, there had to have some Christian component in them for them to be tolerated. So this is, of course, more images from Bursa. Let's look at a couple more. It's just beautiful. These are, of course, my photos. I was actually allowed in to see them. It was closed at that time, but I asked very special permission, and I was let in. Next image, but just beautiful, beautiful art. Now, this is the other possible location. This is images of Adrianople, the other one where Murad set up his capital. It is also quite impressive, but I favor more Bursa because there's already a very well-established intellectual tradition that connects directly to his thought system. And let's go to another image of Adrianople. Nevertheless, it is an absolutely beautiful city. Now, the next image is interesting. Go next one. At the Ottoman court, most likely at Bursa, although some will contend Adrianople, Plethon was known to have studied under a Jewish scholar by the name of Elisha, also known as Elisaios, and studied through him and others Aristotle, Jewish cabbalistic philosophy, and Zoroastrianism. Scholarios claims it was just this Elisha who influenced Plethon to begin to deviate from his traditional Christian orthodoxy to conform to the Hellenistic and polytheistic views of this particular Jew. So, once again, we get information from him. Scholarius also states that this Elisha was burnt alive. Now, while this could be an accidental death, the way he states it appears to be more connected to being, unfortunately, being burned to death for his teachings. Another hint about the reasons for his death is found in other writings of Scholarius, where he states, quote, if a Jew dares to distort Christian reasoning, he is liable to capital punishment. While this implies a possible connection with Elisha, the problem here is it appears that capital punishment occurred within Christian rather than Muslim domains. And so we have another situation because, believe it or not, the Muslims at this time here in the Ottoman Empire were very tolerant of various views and beliefs, and Jews and Muslims were very close under a large portion of time of the Ottoman Empire. So he's describing what happens to Jews who are considered problematic within the Byzantine Empire, not within the Ottoman Empire. But you could see where there could be some problems, right? You could see where it's like, wait, so this Plethon, he leaves Constantinople and he spends time in the enemy's court, in the Muslim court, learning all these things, heretical things. And then on top of it, now he is learning Jewish thought also within these realms. Oh, okay. So next image. Well, then Plethon throws in something else. Zoroastrianism. That's right. So as mentioned, Plethon studied Zoroastrianism. In fact, Plethon considered Zoroaster to not only be the predecessor of Plato, which was controversial enough to Orthodox theologians who praised his works, but also one of the most eminent of all ancient legislators and a philosopher dedicated to seeking wisdom. All these ideas he put on paper in his work entitled The Summary of Zoroaster and Plato, which was instantly controversial. Here, Plethon's descriptions of these men crossed over to perspectives that seemingly arose from his own beliefs. Even a trace of polytheistic notions with an overarching monad become very apparent. Next image. Zoroastrianism originated in ancient Persia, became one of the most popular beliefs as a result of the unification of the Persian Empire and the state religion as well. The first record of this belief system actually arrives via the Greek historian Herodotus in the 5th century, who discusses them in connection to those known as the Magi, who constituted the 6th tribe of the Medes. As we know, the Medes would combine with the Persians to create their empire. The Magi were often persecuted, even by some of the early Persian rulers, but this appears to have stopped under Darius I, 550 to 486 BCE, who was known as a devotee of Ahura Mazda, understood to be their god. Zoroastrianism was founded by the Persian prophet Zarathustra, known as Zoroaster in Greek, who at the age of 30 received a unique revelation from God, who he called Ahura Mazda. The word Ahura means being, while the word Mazda translates as mind. So this god literally was known as being mind, and is the ever-present mind of the universe, who is always in existence, perpetually creating and maintaining all things. This god was considered alone, true and good, and created the universe and all that is within it. Zarathustra asserted all should worship this one God, and so promoted a form of monotheism that has some qualifications, not being as strictly focused as Judaism and Christianity, but still a revolutionary change from the more culturally entrenched Indo-Persian polytheism. You see here early Zoroastrianism did indeed influence early Judaism, especially during what is known as the Babylonian captivity. Zoroastrianism had a system whereby, depending on what you do, if you do good acts, those are, of course, signs of merit. If you do bad acts, these are signs of evil. And what will happen is that your soul, let's look at me for a split second. And so what happens, briefly, is that you have your soul, and it splits into two when you're living, and your oversoul watches everything that you're doing in life and takes a tally of good and bad things that you do. If you do good things, then you're on Ahura Mazda's side. If you do bad things, then you are very much on the side of the opposite, who is not the light, who is not the all-powerful fire, but is the agent of darkness known as Agromanu. And so what happens is, by your actions, you choose one or the other. When you die, then the oversoul connects with your regular soul and says whether you've been naughty or nice. If you've been good, then when you cross what's called the Chindvat Bridge, and that bridge is strong, it's mighty, and you cross right over and go to the place known as the House of Song, which is like paradise. But if you've been bad, then the Chindvat Bridge swings and moves everywhere and falls, and you fall into the house of lies, pain and torture, and there's fire and brimstone, gnashing of teeth. It's a terrible place. You don't want to be there, right? And the food's not very good. So then what happens is that at a certain point in time, what happens is that, you're going to have a period where there is one who is born of a virgin, Sarashat, and he is a minor redeemer. He's a savior according to Zoroastrianism. And what he does is, there's an apocalypse. The moon turns to blood. He is connected to a general resurrection, and those from the house of pain, lies, they're resurrected, and those from the house of song are resurrected, and they're brought together, and they fight this great war between the forces of light and the forces of darkness. In the end, of course, the forces of light win the day. And so those from both those houses, of course, obviously those who are from the house of song are fighting on the side of the angels, and those who are in the house of lies are fighting the side of the demons. Very strong dualism. And in the very end, of course, they're all brought before the great throne judgment. Both groups, and they're all pushed back into the lake of fire as they sit before the throne of Ahura Mazda, who is offering up the judgment. And those who are of light will not burn, and those who are of darkness will be destroyed. Anyway, you can see there's interesting aspects because you have a devil-like character, and you're going to have also a redeeming savior kind of character. You're going to have the idea of an apocalypse, the end of the world going on there, right? Yeah. So you have almost a purgatorial conception there, all these different ideas. And so what will happen is that these ideas will then go into Judaism. Let's leave that chart again. Go into Judaism during the Babylonian captivity. And so you can see right there, and that's the connection there. And you can see it continues on, and you can see how it continues into, so the three Abrahamic religions are directly influenced by Zoroastrianism. Next image. This is Zoroastrianism made easy. So now, again, Ahura Mazda was considered alone, true, and good, creating the universe and all that was within it. Zarathustra asserted all should worship this one God, and so promoting a form of monotheism with some qualifications, not being as strictly focused as Judaism and Christianity, but still a revolutionary change from the more culturally entrenched Indo-Persian polytheism. Zoroastrian theology is not strictly monotheistic, for in fact, this belief system is actually strongly dualistic. When Zarathustra was taken up to heaven during his various visions, the god Ahura Mazda told him he has an opponent by the name of Ado Manu, who was his exact opposite. For rather than being a god of light and goodness, this spirit was the promoter of darkness and evil. While Ahura Mazda sought to maintain creation, Ado Manu sought to destroy it at all costs. Ahura Mazda told Zarathustra that he had to inform all of humanity that they had a choice. Either they chose Ahura Mazda, who represents light, life, and goodness, or they could follow Ado Manu, who represents darkness, death, and evil. The choice was up to each individual. Having free will, they did so by their actions, making Zoroastrianism a very highly ethical religious belief. So you see this again. I'm going, wait. So Plethon is studying under Muslims, and then he's studying under Jews, and now he is studying under Persians. I mean, this is pretty amazing. This is the 1400s. Well, there's somebody else. Next image. The question is whether Plethon was a follower of the Iranian philosopher Zoroastrianism, who was from 1155 to 1191, via his Jewish teacher Elisha. As for evidence, Scholarius asserts Elisha was associated with two very distinct philosophical influences, one being Zoroastrianism, which we now know, and the other being Averroes, the Aristotelian philosopher. Both of these areas happen to be the focus of Zoroastrianism. This Iranian mystic focused on the philosophy of illumination, deeply revering Pythagoras and the inspired and illuminated Plato. Often the ideas of Plethon and Zoroastrianism appear to match. At one point, Plethon states, true opinions are coeval, or he says in Greek, synedia, with the universe and mankind, even if they prevail at times over many people and at times over few. While Zoroastrianism asserts, quote, do not imagine that philosophy has existed only in these recent times, the times of Pythagoras, Plato, and the Persian philosophers. The world has never been without philosophy or without a person possessing proofs and clear evidences to champion it. Thus shall it be so long as the heavens and the earth endure. And this is, again, is very much the same thought as Plethon. As for other commonalities between Plethon and Zoroastrianism, Nikitas Sinuglu states, quote, Plethon's procession of divinities in the nomai may be read as evoking the radiation of light beings pervading and holding together all levels of reality, which is mentioned by Zoroastrianism. The complex angelology of Zoroastrianism also invokes the manner in which Plato assigns the supervision of particular aspects of the physical and intellectual world to specific deities. That's right, different deities. Further, it has been recently noted that the theory according to which Alesios was a follower of Zoroastrianism is strengthened by the prominent role of angelology in both Iranian mysticism and, of course, the Kabbalah. Zoroastrianism also identifies archetypes, Platonic forms, with an order of luminous spheres, constructing a system analogous to the Plethon ontological chain of being, in which Greek deities are identifiable with Platonic forms. Both Zoroastrianism and Plethon were aiming to create a spiritual map with references to the imaginary or imaginary beings and archetypes transcending from the corporeal world. So you have this, right? So next image. So here's an outline of some of his ideas going into the conception of the luminous substance, the luminous state, and also his light theology, not to be understood as L-I-T-E, but L-I-G-H-T. So it becomes pretty apparent that there is influence here the more you look at it. Oh, the next image. And then how can we forget? Plethon also revered Zoroaster as the inspiration behind, drumroll please, the Chaldean Oracles. Ascribed by the pseudo to a father and son, both named Julian, at the latter half of the 2nd century CE, the Chaldean Oracles were widely acclaimed by such Neoplatonic philosophers as Porphyry, and especially my favorite, Iamblichus, in his formation of the idea of theurgy. The word theurgy or theurgeria means divine working, next image, and is concentrated on the performance of rituals performed with the intention of invoking the actions or evoking the presence of one or more gods, especially with the goal of uniting with the divine, achieving what's known as henosis, and perfecting oneself. Next image. These acts are often viewed as magical. Meanwhile, the word henosis is used to describe the mystical process of oneness, of union or unity in classical Greek. As noted by Proclus around 480 CE, theurgy is a power higher than all human wisdom, embracing the blessings of divination, the purifying powers of initiation, and a word. All the operations of divine possession. While some later Byzantine thinkers, especially Michael Psalis, mentioned the Chaldean Oracles, Plethon truly took these works to heart. Next image. Okay, so I will look at this in a few moments. This is good. This is really good because it does fit. I'll take this image down. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the Chaldean Oracles as it connects here. So the Chaldean Oracles today survive only in fragments, but much of what we are given through these remnants, they are intended to be revelations from the gods that inform the world that it is dualistic, much like in Zoroastrianism, with the upper realm of the intelligibles consisting of spirit and collecting from that which is called the good, and the lower realm of matter, which is the material, and in the case of Zoroastrianism, considered evil, right? But still chaos, right? The Chaldean Oracles. In order to enhance Zoroaster, Plethon decided to edit these Chaldean Oracles, as collected by Michael Passalis, the famous Byzantine scholar, and actually published them as Zoroaster's oracles. Now, I want to say this, really do want to say this, is that you're going, okay, this would be like no big deal if we were talking about antiquity doing this, right? This is the 1400s. This is pretty radical, right? 1400s, in the of course, obviously, in the Latin West is the Middle Ages, right? This is the 1400s. We just had the 100-Year War, the bubonic plague, and all, you got the Inquisition going on in the Latin West, but still in the East, people are looking for heretics left and right. And here is Plethon, hanging around Muslims, hanging around people, Jewish scholars, hanging around Persian thinkers, and then coming up, connecting Zoroastrianism with Platonism, and he's like bold. He's publishing these things. I mean, you got to be crazy to do that. The guy has guts. He really does. He does. And I don't really know how he gets away with it, but he does. Okay, sorry. I'm getting off the podium and going back, but I just want to make sure you understand that. So he's now merging Zoroastrianism with Platonism, and of course, obviously, the Chaldean Oracles, with obviously some Jewish mysticism, and yes, a dash of the Kabbalah too. Beyond the duality between the forces of light and darkness, the Chaldean deities, like the Christian Trinity, is understood in three parts. But there, the similarities end for the most part. The first component is the eternal and impenetrable monad, known as the paternal intellect or the first fire. And of course, Plato will later call this Zeus. Wait for it. Emanating from the paternal monad arises the very second intellect, that is didactic, because it unites the paternal monad with the physical world of the second intellect's creation. Thus, the second intellect acts as a bridge between the two worlds. The second intellect is often called the second fire, which Plethon calls Poseidon. Finally, the third part of the Chaldean deity is the cosmic soul. The Chaldean oracles identify the cosmic soul as Hekate, and she is the power that both brings together and keeps apart the first and second transcendent fires. Now, Platon doesn't call this third aspect Hekate, although he does further down talk about Hekate. He calls this third part Hera, or the couch. According to the Chaldean oracles, the material realm was fashioned by the second intellect, acting as the demiurge that we know from Plato. And meanwhile, the first intellect emanated, of course, Hekate, which of course he understands as Hera, acting much like Sophia, who was the world soul, acting as mediator between the intelligible realm above and the material world below. To gain enlightenment, one must combine ascetic discipline to help free one from the shell of matter about the soul, acting like a burdensome garment, and to participate in correct ritual, often understood as theurgy, to move one's soul ever upward through participating with these upper powers. But as in Zoroastrianism, demons lurk in the lower regions, attempting to stop the soul from ascending. For Plethon, I mean, you're thinking we're talking, this is like that Chaldean talk that I did earlier. This is Plethon. This is his work in the 1400s. For Plethon, the Chaldean oracles were not only connected to Zoroaster, they were occult books with the oracles directly related to magical practices. Plethon's version of the Chaldean oracles is much shorter than the earlier versions by Passalis. only consisting of 60 Greek hexameters. The divine as the infinite fire in these oracles, as gathered by Plethon, while making sense from the perspective of Zoroastrian beliefs, as certain Stoic conceptions, for example, his dread Heimermen and so forth. Fate governs the sociological ascent narrative, which is also present in Plethon's text. So you have this here. So via his interpretation, Plato understands the Chaldean Oracles that he identifies with Zoroaster as endorsing a magical mediation between the supreme God, the intermediate powers or archetypes and thoughts, and specifically the invoking Thurgist. The great god of light initially invokes the ineffable magical names, who then hastens forth out of him, leap into the spheres, and then return to him. The seeker, who is the Thurgist, while enacting spells, Plato explains these can be understood as acts of piety conducted in a way as to do a direct and positive effect upon the cosmological framework. Ritual was fundamental to one's everyday life, but those who make this philosophy as front and center, not to be understood as magicians, but as mystics. Curiously, as I mentioned before, Plethon replaces the name of the third power, which is Hekate, a title so prevalent in the earlier versions of the Chaldean Oracles all the way to the version by Paracelsus, to Hera, or also coitus, which means couch, stating that in the left flanks of the couch is a source of virtue, which remains wholly within and does not give away its virginity. So it's the ever virginal aspect. He exhorts his reader to engage the rains of fire manifest in their religious rituals and practices. Fire then loses its status as a metaphor for the various steps of the ascent to heaven, and instead begins to express the individual's encounter with the transcendent divinity in ritual. The Chaldean oracles traditionally assert an ascetic view, especially in regards to the body, with the material aspect viewed as imperfect or evil, while the spiritual aspect as potentially good. But in Platon's version, the idea of the body as specifically evil is repressed. What had happened is that as the Chaldean oracles entered into the conversation within the Christian realm, the concept of became more, went from chaos to actual evil. And what happens is that Platon is bringing us back to the idea of more of chaos as the balance against that which is good. So which is good is unified, that which is bad is chaotic. Of course, if it's chaotic, kakos, they say in Greek, then it is understood as bad. But it is not poniros, which is the word we use for evil. So it's not that. And it's definitely not hamartia, which is mistaken. Although in some cases you could see him leaning that way to the idea that, well, maybe there is an imperfection there that's involved. But there you have it. In fact, Platon also applies the typical negative theology of Eastern Orthodoxy to describe the realm beyond the material, stating that when the curved mass of heaven is not visible, when the stars do not shine, the light of the moon is veiled, the earth stands not firm, then all things appear as lightning. So there you have that. So he's delving now. I will show this briefly, and we'll go back to it. So let's go to that last slide, and I just want to say a few words, and then we jump indeed, and that is, yeah. So this is the order of emanations. This is what he comes up with, but at the very end of the talk today, we're going to go over this in a little bit more detail. But you can see you got Zeus at the top, Poseidon and Hera, and then you have Apollo, Artemis, Hephaestus, Dionysus, Athena, and then of course it moves all the way down through. So we'll talk about those in a minute. But he's putting this together, which is just very overtly pagan, and he's coming up with these ideas, and you can see where his rival is Scholarius is becoming very suspicious of him. Well, it's time for him to come home. So next image, time home to, well, Constantinople. So Constantinople at the time was a very still large, sort of, but and so what happens is, yeah, um, he does, before getting to Constantinople, after leaving the court of Murad I, there's evidence that he traveled to some other places, including Cyprus and Palestine, gathering more and more philosophical information from surviving texts and religious teachers. You can only imagine how controversial Plethon became as soon as he returned to Constantinople. Next image. This is an image of Constantinople. This is actually from Hartmann Schleiber's Book of Chronicles of History, published in 1493, but it still gets you the idea of what Constantinople looked during the time of Plethon. Next image. Here's a close-up. You see all these empty spaces within the walls that were still there. You see a few churches in green area within the walls of Constantinople. What in the world is going on? And what happened is long story real short, Constantinople was a thriving center, capital of the Byzantine Empire. And in the year 1204, the Fourth Crusade turned on their fellow Christians and destroyed lots of it, burned much of it, and looted much of it, bringing a lot back to Venice and other places. And so it suffered a decline. Fortunately, the Latins were kicked out in 1261, where the Byzantines were able to reconquer the capital, but it still wasn't exactly the same. And so by the time the Turks took it in 1453, there were cattle grazing in vast green areas within the city walls that once were filled with great structures and temples and monuments. And so you can see this still in the image of 1493 under the Turks, where it still has these open spaces. Next image. There's me and Hagia Sophia, which thrived. Fortunately, it was preserved and continues to stand to this day. Next image. As Hagia Sophia from the exterior. These, of course, are my pictures. When Plethon got back, he gave a series of lectures on Platonism at the university that were regarded as highly subversive, to the point where he was considered by many to be a heretic, and worse still for the Orthodox establishment, even a pagan as well. So he was, after his trip, he's understood as pretty problematic. Let's see a few more images of Constantinople at this time. This is the palace where he would have visited. This is one of the two palace major, well, actually more two. Well, this is the seaside palace that he would have visited, one of them. And you can see on top there, they built a tea house as well. Next image. Here's the walls of Constantinople and the Blackanar Palace, which is another major palace that was used during the time of the Paleologi, is located there. I've been there. Next image. This is another, of course, major church. Next image. I want to show that the image, this is fascinating. So this image, you can see perspective is being added. This is almost Renaissance art. And you can see things are changing during the Byzantine Empire with this particular piece. Is very dynamic. And so there is a resurge. I want to say that during the twilight of the Byzantine period, the art actually started to improve and get pretty amazing as they started to look inward as opposed to outward. With the Ottomans about to take over, they started to focus on the illuminated life on the inside, spirituality, mysticism. This is reflected very much in art like this one. Next image. Here's the Blackanar Palace. And yes, Plethon would have gone here too, because he was very well known to the emperor. In fact, here we go. So George Scholarius, one of his own students, or sort of student, he every so often sat in, and then he betrayed him. believed that Plethon's passionate views of Plato were suspicious. Perhaps he was just incensed by his teacher's consistent attack on Aristotle, whom Scholarios had chosen to advocate as his personal favorite over and above Plato. Of course, his suggestions against his own teacher spread to the emperor, and it did not help Plethon's position in Constantinople. The emperor, of course, we'll talk about this in a second. So let's look at a few more images here. So this is where the emperor would have been. Next image here. There we go. The emperor Manuel II Paleologos from 1391 to 1425 was presumed to act against Plethon, yet he was conflicted because he also happened to be a friend and personal admirer of Plethon. He liked him. But the Scholarius is causing lots of problems. Hence, he created a sort of exile for him. What do you mean, sort of? Suggesting to Plethon that he might find the city of Mistra, next image, located not far from ancient Sparta on the Greek Peloponnese, as more congenial as an environment for his academic pursuits. Plethon readily embraced the idea of leaving behind a judgmental and, from his vantage point, overtly conservative and superstitious Constantinople for the open and free-ranging lands so famous from antiquity for its hardy spirit and heroic mannerisms. Next image. And so he went here. In general, I mean, it's a beautiful place. In general, Plethon viewed the Byzantine Empire as merely the inheritor of the legacy of Greece and Rome, the adopted stepchild of their literature and philosophy, and often a poor one at that. Plethon thought that at Mistra he was closer to the Greek legacy, and then, of course, upstart Constantinople, next image, which was once thought beyond the fold of true Greeks, believing this area to be in the wilds of barbarian lands. With the ruins of ancient Sparta only 5 miles away, Plethon felt a kindred spirit with the ancient Spartans and their disciplined ways, and much like Plato himself, disdained the Athenian ideals and its democratic system. Next image. Plethon then soon became a very public figure in the place. Mistra, given land for all his public services. He also created an informal school of thought surrounded by fellow intellectuals who frequented the court of the despots of Morea. Morea was another name for the Peloponnese. So let's look at me for a second. So Plethon was not simply a philosopher who liked to hear himself talk or live within the realm merely of the abstract, for he believed his ideas had very practical applications, something he also impressed upon his students, both at Mistra and, very importantly, in Italy. He believed his ideas could actually save Morea, the Peloponnese, from destruction by the Ottoman Turks and others who desired her fertile lands. And so he made concrete plans to do just that. Between 1414 and 1418, next image, Plethon formally proposed a series of memoranda addressed to the Emperor Manuel and his despot son. Oh, okay, I didn't see this image. This is a good image. This is how it used to look like. Next image. Oh, wait, that's great. There's the ruins of Sparta right there. Yeah, I told you there's next image. So despot Theodore. And so we don't have many pictures of the despot Theodore in charge of Morea, the Peloponnese area, but we do have him as a little kid. So let's zoom him up a little bit. Next image. There. So that's a despot. So what happens is that he's addressing Manuel and his son, Paleologos, trying to tell them what kind of society that he's hoping to find. Okay, let's look at me for quite a while. We'll go from here. Okay, so now you got to hear this. Plethon stressed the need to depend on local citizens to make up the army rather than hired mercenaries, the bane of the existence of so many other weaker areas about the Byzantine Empire. Since, there's no pay, there's no loyalty, right? He organized society into 3 tiers with a ruling class that included the military at the very top, followed by a class of service workers, and finally manual workers, respectively. He proposed legislation upholding rigorous standards of temperance. Furthermore, he proposed that imports and exports were closely regulated, with imports as a ban on foreign clothing. This is the same as ancient Sparta. They did the same thing. Also discouraged potential luxury goods and encouraged the growth of their own textile industries. Once again, this is Sparta 101, that disdained anything that's materialistic, and back as far back as the 6th century BCE. In his address to Manuel II, Plethon urged that soldiers be exempt from taxation, providing an immediate tangible benefit for their services to the society at large. Of course, as I mentioned, these soldiers were made up of citizens who readily volunteered for the job of defending their land. Meanwhile, taxpayers known as helots, again, hearkening to the Spartan tradition, would support the soldiers, but they were also free from any military obligations. He vehemently ridiculed monks for their laxity, believing they were mere drones who offered little benefit to society. The monks are not going to be happy about that. And so he declared that laws should be passed to ensure that they too labored within this new order. It doesn't matter if you have decided the ascetic life of a monk, you're going to work for society. Okay. One of Plethon's most radical ideas in his address to Manuel II was to assert that in his new order, all land should be held in common. He states, I'm quoting now, "I would suggest that all the land should be the common property of all its inhabitants, as perhaps it is by nature, and that no man should claim any part as his private property. Every man who wishes to do so should be allowed to plant a crop wherever he will, to erect a house, and to plow as much land as he wishes and is able to plow, and on the assumption that he will have the amount at his disposal insofar as, on the condition that he does not neglect to till it while he is its occupant. Meanwhile, he should pay not rent to any person and should not be let or hindered by any person other than one who has anticipated him in cultivating it. And this according to the rule regulating all common property that does not belong to any one man more than it does to another." Wow, unquote. But all Plethon's plans were of no use. They were too rigid and authoritarian, even for his contemporaries. Plethon had embraced his Spartan surroundings to a degree even beyond considered acceptable to those who did revere him and his ideas. While so many of his ideas would continue in various societies, Byzantium was of the mindset that religious devotion, especially to God and the Virgin Mary, rather than political and social reform, were key to success. Now you're thinking, okay, well, this guy, I guess we're counting them out. Then something completely strange happens. But Plethon was meant to take one major journey. The real question is, why would they choose Plethon for this journey, knowing his background? Plethon was meant to take one more journey, and this one to the west, to the Council of Ferrara, Florence, as one of the representatives of the Byzantine delegation from 1438 to 1439. Realizing that the Byzantine Empire was under a very real threat from the growing power of the Ottomans, the Byzantine Emperor John VIII and many within the court of Constantinople sought union with the Latin West. Let's go to the next image. Hoping that such a move to reconcile the difference between their two churches in theology and practice would result in a tangible military aid on the part of the papacy. So they're going, hey, maybe if the Greek Orthodox Church has a union with the Latin Catholic Church during this pivotal time, they become one church. Perhaps now at this time, the Latin West can declare a crusade to save us from the Ottomans. And so once again, this is from 1438 to 1439. By the way, Constantinople will fall in 1453 to the Turks. So you see how that worked out, right? So in next image, so 1433, there he is. The Byzantine Emperor John had the Eighth sent 3 ambassadors to represent him in a possible new church council that placed union on the negotiating table. And this was soon followed by other embassies from the imperial palace. While John wished for the council to meet at Constantinople, he realized immediately that this was not up for discussion. No, the meeting had to be in Italy. It had to be close to the Pope. So by 1437, the council site was agreed upon as the Italian city of Ferrara, with the Emperor John and Joseph II, next image, Joseph II, the 80-year-old Patriarch of Constantinople, going in person. That's right, the Emperor is going in person along with the Patriarch of Constantinople. At this time, Joseph II was not in good health, suffering from age and heart disease. The embassy, however, included 700 others, including Bessarion of Nicaea, George Scholarios, who we've already met, the rival of Plethon, and of course, George Gemistus Plethon himself. When the Greek embassy arrived at Ferrara in the pouring rain of 1438, Pope Eugenius made it known that he expected Patriarch Joseph II to prostrate himself in front of him and kiss his foot. When Joseph II heard this, he refused to embark until such an expedition was rescinded. Now, John told the delegates and the Pope in February of 1438 that the actual council needed to wait for about 4 months, next image, as he traveled about Europe, meeting with various kings and princes for assistance against the Ottomans. The Pope was not pleased, as he had to foot the bill for taking care of 700 Greek delegates. So it's like, what is he doing? John is hedging his bets. He's going, you know what? What I'm going to do is, I'm getting help, trying to unify the church, put it all together. But what I'm also going to do is I'm going to look for alliances with these various kings to help me out too against the Ottomans. He knows things are up. So what happens is eventually they began to discuss purgatory, feeling very much in purgatory themselves as they waited for the emperor, but came to no formal agreement. And so, let's take a look at a few images of Ferrara. There it is, beautiful Ferrara. So they're there. Next image. Then the plague hit Ferrara in August. Next image. But while the Latins became sick and many died, the Greeks were apparently immune, complaining instead that they had been here so long that they're running out of money. Finally, next image, the Council of Ferrara began on October of 1438, discussing at length the filioque clause, whether it was more proper to say that the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father, as it was understood by the Eastern Orthodox, or that the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father and the Son. Hence, filioque, postpositive, filio son que and, which the Latin Church added later on into the Nicene Creed. On the side of the Greeks, Mark Eugenicus of Ephesus said that the Council of Ephesus in 451 determined, quote, To no one it is allowed to recite, write, or compose a faith other than that defined by the Holy Fathers in Nicaea, meaning that the filioque addition was not permissible. But the Latins argued that the filioque was not an addition at all, only a clarification. Plethon was brought to this council specifically to discuss this issue, considered valuable because he was an accomplished scholar at defending the Eastern idea of the procession of the Holy Spirit and had written on that topic. Yet he apparently did not do much to distinguish himself at the council itself. So you know, I kind of have to laugh here, and then I'm going to go into it a little bit. Just look at me for a second here. Why I have to laugh is that, yeah, of course he's good at anything that has to do with processions, because it's all about emanations. He's all about emanation of theology. He's all about the monad emanating, right? Moving out through its emanations, and you got the second and the third and so forth. So he's really good at it. But it's interesting is that he's really good at it, and he had already developed those ideas within a mystical tradition that had combined conceptions related to not only the Chaldean Oracles and Neoplatonism, but cabbalistic thinkings and Zoroastrianism. So he already has these ideas. So he's really good at. So why would they bring him here? That's the question. I mean, all those others are considered really orthodox, but they brought somebody who they knew was heterodox, who they knew who's problematic, who was a thorn in the side, who had already been exiled to Mistras. He's already, causing so much controversy in his teachings at Constantinople, and then they bring him to this council because he's good at what he does, right? But he's going to get into mischief. Oh, big time mischief. You don't leave somebody who is of such a great intellectual status and such a troublemaker like Plethon alone for very long, especially a place where he's going to be heading for. And where is that place? Florence. Next image. Oh no. So next image. So what happens here is that there is Florence. So when John returned to Constantinople in February of 1440, the Greeks greeted him by denouncing the entire decree of union as a farce and condemned him and his delegates. But before that, I want to bring up the fact that so I got to go earlier. Sorry. So Plethon was brought to the council for this reason. And what happened is the Pope decided that he should move the council to Florence because the plague kept coming back at Ferrara. Although he had financial reasons too, because the Medici could now foot the bill for all the Greek guests and not the Pope. So next image. By February of 1439, having been gone from home for a year, the Greek delegates were anxious to return home and more ready to compromise. As for the filioque, they came to an agreement that the concept of the Holy Spirit proceeded from the Father and the Son meant the same as the Holy Spirit proceeding from the Father through the Son. After this compromise, Joseph II, the patriarch, died. Next image. So you can see the beautiful Duomo here. Next image. But the Greeks did not agree with the Latin doctrine of purgatory. So purgatory was a big problem for them. The Greek Orthodox Church simply does not believe in purgatoria. It's not part of their belief system, and yet it had deeply entrenched itself in the theology of the Latin West. Next image. In fact, it was quite colorful by this time, even in art, this holding place but also this place of possible suffering that they needed to be expunged from. Next image. Yeah, they took these ideas quite to heart. So they came to really no agreement on purgatory. Next image. Oh, one more. Yeah, of course, the Greeks, the Latin West had a pretty complex levels of purgatory. Thank you so much, Dante. But so much of these ideas, I guess I'll go here for a little bit. So much of these ideas are based upon Roman understandings. Just look at me for a few seconds and I'll explain this and we'll keep going. So what happens is this. I can take this one down for a second. So what occurs is this, is that you had this idea of this in-between place within Plato actually talks about this in-between place and in between lifetimes you go to this place in between, the best way to put it. And then, of course, sometimes those people who are here, who had a good life, the next life they'll choose one that is not as good, and vice versa. This notion also gets into Virgil's Aeneid. And so what will happen is that when you die, you cross the river Styx. You go through the various levels of Hades, the top parts where the innocents are, the babies who died and immediately they're reincarnated, or those people who were killed for crimes they did not commit. They're there and then they go back up again. The next level, of course, are the suicides. The next level are those who are the war, and who fought in battles and so forth, or fading out. And you get down to the lowest level, not lowest level, and all of a sudden you come to the great throne. Usually, sometimes there's three judges. Sometimes it's Hades and Persephone, and there's a right path, there's a left path. And what happens if you've been good, doing good works, then what will happen is that you go to a paradise, you go to Elysium, you go to the place Isles of the Blessed, you go to a happy, positive place, and you are there for 1,000 years. But if you've been bad, lots of bad things, then you go to the left and you go to a place known as Tartarus. Tartarus, you'll be there for 1,000 years, in which there are flames, there are floods, there are tortures, and they call this realm purgatoria, where you're being purged of that which is bad or evil out of you. Now, if you're not too bad, you could be there for a limited time, 200, 300 years, you get transferred to Elysium. But if you're really bad, you're there for the full 1,000. After the 1,000 years have passed so long, their penances may last, to quote from Virgil, then they are all, by the driving Lydian flood, are pushed to drink from the waters of Lethe, the waters of forgetfulness, and then they are reincarnated. So this is a purgatoria. So what happens is this notion in the Latin West is very popular. It's part of popular culture. It starts to seep into ideas related to Catholic Latin theology. And so this idea starts to grow and grows into the purgatory that we know so well. Is that making sense? But this notion does not happen in into the Greek East. Virgil was not a big deal. While Virgil was recommended reading for all Roman school children, they had to read it, and so hence they get this stuff. They didn't get it in the East, so purgatory never developed. So I hope that kind of helps. Okay, so there's no agreement on this one. Next image. Okay, so they couldn't agree on this one either. The use of unleavened bread for the Eucharist. For the Greek East, you use leavened bread, which is known as resurrection bread. For the Latin West, you use, next image, unleavened bread. And so, of course, you recognize this. And so this conversation is simply going nowhere too. Goes back and forth. Meanwhile, next image, the Latins attacked the Orthodox idea of the uncreated energies of God as being able to be seen. But again, there was this enforced idea that they must agree. So this idea of hesychism became in the Greek East. Next image. In the Greek East, what they believe is that because Peter, James, and John were able to see the uncreated light of God at the Mount of Transfigurations. So, though individual believers can also attain and see the uncreated light by doing a certain meditation known as the Hesychast prayer, they can actually see the energies of God. They can actually see the light of God. And the Latin West simply could not agree with this notion. So this is not going very, very well. Okay, so next image. So on what happens is that they decided that agree to disagree, but permit others to live and let live in order to get that union signed. So they signed the union on July 5th, 1439. Both churches agreed upon the decree of union. Only Mark Eugenicus, seen here, the Metropolitan of Ephesus, refused to sign the compact. Next image. This is him leaving Florence. And of course, when John returned, the Greeks greeted him. They saw this union as a charade, and they refused to endorse it. We're not going to support this union between the Greek East and the Latin West. Meanwhile, Mark became a hero and proved to become a rallying point for the opposition against the emperor and his church policies. But it was, next, let's look at me now, but we forgot Plethon. But it was at Florence where Plethon was to make history. For a while, he played only a small role at the council itself. It was his sideshow at Florence that would transform Renaissance Italy. Plethon decided to lecture in the city about Plato, so little understood by these individuals in the Latin West. It was Plethon's lectures on Plato, and especially his dialogues, which created the biggest sensation. Plato's dialogues were completely unknown in the original Greek form for his Italian audiences. And he knew it. And he also knew they wanted more. This was the quintessential moment bequeathed to us for what happens here is that Greek heritage, especially the legacy of Plato, was given to the body of Latin humanists eager to hear more about this great ancient Greek philosopher who stood as merely the shadow behind their Aristotle, the latter so championed in the West after his reintroduction from Muslim Spain, especially the scholars of scholasticism in the 11th and 12th centuries. Next image. Since the fall of the Western Roman Empire, the philosophical emphasis in the Latin West was concerned with more theological constructs than the intricate nature of humanity. But this changed with the Renaissance. Next image. See, those of the West had this notion of Aristotle in which everything, you have this unmoved mover, and everything moves from that, but at the same time, there is a strict hierarchy. Those who are the higher level of society are born to that level. Those who are in the lower part of society are born to that level. There is this insistent separation between all things. Unfortunately, as we find from those like Thomas Aquinas, they'll interpret the idea that if you are born a slave, you stay a slave. There is no relational aspect of moving or motion forward and upward. Next image. So very strong hierarchies, which, by the way, kings and nobles liked because it ensured their power, right? But now, this is all going to change. This is all going to shift very, very quickly. Let's look at me for a second. You see, this changed with the Renaissance as the Italians began to rediscover their rich ancient heritage. Yet the rediscovery of Roman culture was still not enough to foster a spirit that is often defined as humanism. For the current philosophical system in the Latin West still would not permit such a conception as wedged as it was within the Aristotelian scholasticism, accompanied by its ever-present hierarchical systems, crowned with God above and humanity further down in the pecking order. As for the creation of the universe, the standard perspective taught by the medieval church was that it was created out of nothing, ex nihilo. In this view, all creation specifically began at one place and time with no legacy of continuity or eternity. The relationship between God and humanity emphasized the latter's separate nature, the inherent divide between deity and mortal. But with the arrival of Plato to the West and the philosophical worldview as espoused by the Neoplatonist thinkers inspired by him, the understood place of humanity in relation to God, and even more importantly, to himself, utterly changed. Instead of the universe as created out of nothing, as a completely separate and arbitrary creation, the Neoplatonists taught that both the spiritual and material world emanated from God, that humanity was a result of this continual procession, and that we are part of the nature of God as an expression of it, made in his image in the Platonic as well as the biblical sense. And so you have this new notion that in a sense, when somebody is an artist, a painter, a sculptor, right, they have within them, right, they are the image of God. So therefore, the creative aspect of God is activated within them, working within them. And so when they are creating the works of art, they are, in a sense, manifesting the power, the creative power of God moving through them, which will lead to people like Michelangelo taking a look at a statue, and he goes within, so taking a look at a block of marble and saying, you know what? The image that I'm supposed to free is already in there, and all I have to do is chip it out. These are the ideas that are moving through. In fact, in many ways, the Renaissance, as we know, could not be possible without a Platonic undergirding. So above, so below. And so therefore, hey, since we're the image of God, guess what we get to do? We are allowed to paint ourselves realistically, because we are, after all, an image of God. So the focus becomes realism, capturing us. It's not ideals anymore. It's us in our actual human condition. You're getting this? Yeah, you're getting this. It's getting big. But who starts this? Plethon! It's not there before, because there is no real emphasis on Plato before he arrives bringing these ideas in the first place. Now you're understanding. While in Florence, Plethon discussed and emphasized these fundamental distinctions between Aristotle, so embraced in the Latin West, and Plato. Much of his arguments are preserved in various philosophical tracts because he likes to write a lot. The most significant highlighting the difference between the philosophies of Plato and Aristotle, often called the difference, where he espoused the views of Plato by pointing out the flaws in Aristotle, written sometime between 1443 and 1449, and claimed by Plethon to be written specifically to the Italians. Here, Plethon made it very clear that Plato was not in harmony with Aristotle, and that to associate the two within the same philosophical camp was absolutely ridiculous. Let's take a look briefly at a chart that compares the two. So you see here, you have the idea of generalic Plato, utopian, idealistic, Aristotle more practical. In metaphysics, what's most real are the forms. You got the two worlds. But for Aristotle, what's most real are the primary substances. Epistemology, strictly speaking, knowledge is only of unchanging forms. For Aristotle, strictly speaking, knowledge is only of form within subjects of experience. View of the soul and body, for Plato, you're essentially your soul, an eternal, immaterial thing with three parts: reason, spirit, appetite. Your soul is inseparable from your body, and at death either reincarnates or, if purified, returns to the world of forms. For Aristotle, you are essentially a rational animal, an organic body animated by dynamic organization principles, allowing you to engage in nutrition, sense, perception, and thinking. Being the form of your body, your soul in general is inseparable from it and perishes at the death of the body. Okay. You can see here, you get the idea, right? They're not really work together. Next image. Okay, so first of all, for Plethon, Plato's ideas of the deity of God were by far more exalted than Aristotle, declaring that Plato's God was the creator of, this is a quote from Plethon, was a creator of every kind of intelligible and separate substance, and hence of our entire universe, while Aristotle has God as merely a natural automaton, the prime mover that merely begins the process and then sits back uninvolved. According to Plethon's Plato, God is not only the beginning of the process of existence, but is also the end and final cause. Yet even here, Plethon's deity is eternal, for beginning and end were merely conventional terms that meant little to a God outside of time. So this God is outside of time. In marked contrast, Plethon viewed Aristotle's God as limited and reduced to succumbing to the mandates of movement and change, so that when movement and change ceased, well, so did Aristotle's God in his view. In fact, Plethon goes on to assert that Aristotle's concept of the prime mover as being located within simply one celestial sphere amongst so many other spheres actually contradicted the belief of God as divine. For it made God finite and not transcendent, regulating him to the same limitations as all other created beings. How was then Aristotle different from the pre-Socratic Anaxagoras, argues Plethon, who advanced some logos beyond all things, but still in many ways limited? Anaxagoras was, right, often believed that we're heading towards atheism, right? So Plethon concluded that Aristotle was possibly moving in the same direction, moving towards a sense of atheism. In contrast to Aristotle, Plethon declared that Plato believed in the universal sovereign over all existing things and assumed him to be the originator of originators, the creator of creators, and refers everything without exception to him. So that's a big idea. Next image. Second, humanity. Humanity was created in the image of God. You've seen this before, right? So above, so below. As a result, humanity emanated from God, the monad, an extension of his radiant divinity by being made in his image. The rigid hierarchy of Aristotle, with beings organized in a descending order, inclusive of humanity, according to one's birth, was abolished, right? Third, as noted by many scholars, Plethon claims that Aristotle seems to distinguish between the tolerable and the intolerable, not qualitatively, especially in his Nicomachean ethics, but by greater and lesser degrees and thus quantitatively. So his charge against Aristotle is that he fails to define morally good or bad objects qualitatively, which is how the Platonists would define moral objects. What matters to Plethon is whether something is wicked or not, right? And so this would make Aristotle morally ambivalent. How then could the Church of the Latin West use Aristotle so prominently in their theology, where he appears to lack any kind of moral center? So the fight is on, right? Let's look at the next image. And so you can see here just kind of a brief view of the difference in their ethics. Plato sees ethics as dependent upon the community. Aristotle sees ethics as dependent upon the individual. Plato believes insights into the good is the foundation of virtue. Actual acts come to second. Aristotle believes habits and a routine of good acts is the foundation of virtue. Insight comes around second, and so forth. So they're very different when it comes to the ethics. So he's claiming that Aristotle's ideas move us towards moral ambivalence and lessens the idea of this powerful God, deity, monad. Next image. This is a famous painting from that period. And you got Aristotle and Plato side by side. I just thought I'd throw this one together. I mean, Aristotle was a student of Plato, but very much spent most of his life later on refuting so many of his claims, and yet building upon aspects of it at the same time. Excuse me, I got a cough here. Okay, so what happens now? Let's look at me for a second, and then we're gonna get really into it. The fun is just about to begin. Oh, and it's going to be fun. But so what happens is that they're fighting. So George Scholarius, hey, you remember him? Responded with a defense of Aristotle. And this in turn led to Plethon's famous reply. The argument expanded from there, first to those who knew Plato best, those Byzantine scholars recently forsaking their turbulent and decaying empire for the Latin West, but eventually the conversation would be carried on by Italian humanists. You know what? Nothing is better to gain attention than a very public fight. This is what's happening. Hey, it's drama, and people are drawn to it. It's like, Plethon, he brings all these works that changes everything about the human condition. We are an image of God. And they start thinking to themselves, since we're the image of God, as above, so below, therefore God's creative acts work through us. And if we're the image of God and everybody else is the image of God, then therefore we're all equal. Maybe even playing on to the Plethon idea of, that's why you hold land together. Anyway, moving around. Are you getting there? So we're all equal, inherently, naturally equal. And therefore, if we're all naturally equal because we're all the image of God, then maybe we all have inalienable rights. And maybe, therefore, we need to study humanity in order to understand God. This sounds like humanism to me. It's happening. But of course, you have this big fight going on with, Aristotle connected to the Catholic system, the old archaic Latin West system that is very oppressive during the Middle Ages, is holding on, there. And all of a sudden, this new, fresh air of Platonism is bringing on a revival, bringing on a renaissance. So George is fighting back. This argument, of course, expands, but while Plethon appears to asserting Plato in connection to Christian orthodoxy, he writes to his Italian audience, he goes as follows. He says, both the Greek and Romans ancestors esteem Plato much more highly than Aristotle, unquote. Yeah, the Greek. The point is that he's right. But what is he doing here? Here, Plethon is not appealing to their common Christian past, but their common pagan one, to those early Greek and Roman philosophers who championed Plato. And it is true, absolutely 100% true. Aristotle was not as popular as Plato during the Roman period of time. And when Aristotle was understood, it was Middle Platonism. They put Aristotle mixed with Plato, but still Plato held the day as strong. So Aristotle's day is actually more of the Middle Ages. Even though Aristotle was known, big schools and everything else, it was oftentimes Plato was more popular. And of course, Stoicism too and others. Okay. Now, here he goes. Next image. And so in the midst of all this, one man loved Plethon above all the rest, a certain Cosimo de' Medici. That's the most powerful man in Florence. Oh, yeah. And so as a result, Plethon became the Medici's main inspiration for the founding of the famous Platonic Academy in Florence. Next image. Changing the philosophical landscape of the Renaissance Italy forever. In fact, this academy was officially dedicated to Plethon. This academy was strictly based upon the Platonic model of education, met on a regular basis to discuss various philosophical issues, and vigorously translated all the works, all the works of Plato into Latin. And then from there, moving on to the works of the Neoplatonist Plotinus, as well as the other Neoplatonists. This became a great translation center. Next image, where all the scholars would congregate together. Next image, and translate these works that were hungrily accepted by the Latin scholars. Next image. So who's this? Okay, so what happens here is that the first director of the Academy was Marsilio Ficini. The most prominent members of the Academy included Giovanni Pico della Mirandola, the founder of humanism and the ideal of the humanities in general. Cristoforo Landino, pressing for academic studies to be in a vernacular rather than simply in Latin. Poliziano, focusing on how scholars must understand first and foremost the historical context of anything written from antiquity. Gentile di Abeti, a famous Italian bishop, diplomat, and orator and writer. And of course, Michelangelo invested some time with the Academy during his early years in Florence. And these people, of course, in turn, connected with Leonardo da Vinci. And so you have that additional connection as well. Okay, so let's look at me for a few moments. The headquarters, as I mentioned, of the Platonic Academy was located at the Villa dei Carigi, in one of the many Medici villas located around Florence. This villa was purchased by the Medici family in 1417 and remodeled to suit the family's aesthetic requirements, including a walled garden. Still, much of the fortified character of the villa was retained. The group continued to meet here until the death of Lorenzo Medici in 1492. Now, Plethon not only had admirers and friends of Italy, but students and even a school inspired by him. His philosophical contributions would go on from there into the West. During this same time, he adopted the name Plethon, for before he was merely known as George Gemestos, but now he was Plethon, meaning abundant, with a connection of being a second Plato, Platon. Here he also wrote a work on virtues and an essay on the first century Greek geographer Strabo, which we'll talk about in a little bit. After Plethon left, Ficini found a new inspiration, next image, in a certain John Argyropoulos, a traveling philosopher and lecturer, and became his eager student. Now, John originated from Constantinople and came to Italy in 1439 to attend the Council of Ferrara, Florence, but then returned again. When Constantinople fell in 1453, he moved to the Peloponnese Peninsula and then was forced to return to Italy by 1456. John then lectured about, focusing his activities in the regions about Florence, Padua, and Rome. Another Florence resident who attended his lectures was a certain Leonardo da Vinci again. By the way, he died, John died because he consumed too much watermelon. What a way to go, right? Naturally, we had, I know. Naturally, next one. When Cosimo de' Medici decided to found his Plato's Academy in Florence, as I mentioned, Ficini was in charge of the establishment. In 1484, Ficini published his massive corpus of Plato, now translated from Greek to Latin. Ficini translated the works of the Neoplatonists, namely Plotinus. In the preface of this translation, Ficini offers a tribute to Plethon in relation to understanding what Aristotle really stood for, stating, "Nowadays, few have interpreted Aristotle's thought with the same faithfulness as once did Theophrastus, Theomastus, Periphas, Cypicus, Avicenna, and recently Plethon," unquote. Unlike many of his accusers, Ficini viewed Plethon as religiously orthodox in his beliefs and a guide for others to learn how to disengage from the incorrect teachings in the Latin West in connection to Aristotle. Next image. Ficini proposed Christianity as a philosophical religion that had at its moral base Plato as taught by Plethon, and that the damage made by those who claimed to understand Aristotle indeed had to be undone, stating, quote, whoever thinks that an impiety so widely diffused can be vanquished by mere simply preaching of faith will be immediately and manifestly proved wrong and terribly mistaken, for this task requires much greater power. It entails at least that philosophers, after they have listened gladly to a philosophical religion, at some point will be persuaded by it. Ficini also, next image, translated periphery as well as iamblichus. And of course, he had a as well. The latter introducing the magical system known as thurgery, which would fundamentally transform magic, introducing what is called a ceremonial magic in retrospect. Next image. You can see also here that here's the general outline of Plotinus's viewpoints. You can see right here the one, the intellect, the higher soul, lower soul, and the corporeal body. Next image. This is the image that's connected to iamblichus and the manifestations connected to the use of thurgy. Right, next image. And of course, we're moving on here to Hermetic writings. Plato himself had encouraged Cosmo de Medici that the Hermetica was also of great value, needed to be translated, for they, like Plato, also called Mysteria. And so the translation, the search for more Hermetic writings commenced in Italy. More works associated with the one known as Hermes Trismegistus were uncovered by the monk Leonardo di Pistoia in 1460, one of the many agents of Cosmo de Medici searching for ancient manuscripts in various dynasty archives throughout Europe. The Hermetica are Egyptian Greek magical wisdom texts written in both Greek and Latin, where Hermes Trismegistus, a combination of the Greek Hermes and the Egyptian Thoth, both deities dedicated to writing and magic, discusses the nature of the universe with various disciples, including Asclepius, Ammon, and Thoth. Much of the materials are ascribed to the school of Ammonius Saccas, which, by the way, was known as the teacher of Plotinus, and also Saccas was also half Indian, even though he lived in Alexandria, so he has an Indian background. Anyway, connected to the Indic philosophy, who thrived in the 2nd century CE. Eventually, these philosophical magical writings reached such Byzantine notables as Michael Pacellus, and in due term ended up in the Latin West. When Cosmo de Medici heard about all these new mystical Neoplatonic Hermetic corpuses were now accessible, he reassigned Marsilio Ficini to translate this work instead. And so Ficini, he's very, very busy. Next image. Okay, so here we have some other manuscripts I do want to mention. Ficini also translated Periphery and Iamblichus. And he also, let's see here. Ficini, excuse me here, also connected to, in medicine, Marcio Ficini taught how one could capture or manipulate celestial magical cords to help a patient through various illnesses by applying magical lures or baits, utilizing a technique employing the concept of like attracts like, hence certain stones and metals, plants and organic matter, vapors and smells, sounds and words, and mental activities and states such as employing reason, entering into mystical contemplation, and even envisioning certain actions through the imagination could capture, attract these celestial energies if one reached the right metaphysical frequency. So, which I think is fascinating. Next image. And so here are some of the manuscripts that are connected to Ficini. Next image. Yeah, there it is. You see his name right. These are manuscripts actually from that period, actually 100 years after. Next image. Yeah, okay, next image. You can see these are all connected to Ficini. Yeah, and so once again, yeah, next image. Yeah, here we go. Here's his metaphysical system, kind of outlined, which does mirror, pardon the expression, that of very much that of Plethon. Next image. Okay, we'll take that down. So I want to go into a little bit here because we're gonna jump into another topic a bit here. Now, knowing well the ages of humanity of Hesiod, Ficini believed that we were entering a new golden age, saying this century, like a gold age, has restored to light the liberal arts, which were almost extinct: grammar, poetry, rhetoric, painting, sculpture, architecture, music. Because this century appears to have perfected astrology. Now, what's going on here is that, as I mentioned before, with Plato, remember, Plethon introduces Plato, and Plato brings about a new understanding of humanity, that we are the image of God. As the image of God, we now become important again. We also, because we're the image of God, can become more and more perfect. We can, because we have that image, can, in a sense, focus in theurgy or other means through worship and so forth, conform more and more to the likeness of God, to be made in God's image, to be followers of Christ, the archetype of Christ. And so what will happen is that therefore no longer are we on this road towards destruction. No longer are we on our way out. Now humanity, because we are in this image, can now become more and more perfect, which makes the idea called human progress possible. We can get better. We can invent new things. We can better our lives because we are, after all, reflections of God. This brings about not only the Renaissance and the idea of evolution and progressive conceptions, but this will lead to the ideas related to the modern age of humanity. But at the same time, because now we are important, studying us happens to be important. And so therefore the humanities come about. Yeah, that section at the university, the humanities. Yes, that becomes important. We need to study humans because humans are, after all, connected to God. To understand humanity is to understand God from the bottom up, so to speak. But at the same time, we have to understand our activities. What are those activities? Hey, it's the liberal arts. Have you heard of that before? And so these ideas all come about manifest. Why? Because of what? Because what happened is Plethon got stuck at Florence, at a place he really doesn't want to be at, got bored, started wandering the streets looking for things to do other than spend time with these men who he thought were boring and heretics anyway. And he just started talking about Plato, ended up getting into the right audiences, getting the ear of Cosmo de Medici, and getting himself into big, good trouble. And what happens as a result of that is they all love Plato. They're all getting into it. The ball is rolling, and then all of a sudden he gets in a fight with one of his fellow rivals, and this becomes a big scene. All of Italy is paying attention. It looks like Plethon won. And then Cosmo de Medici, what does he do? He creates a center for the studying of Plato and translating his works and those related to him. And this system changes the mindset, which undergirds the whole point of the Renaissance. There is no Renaissance as we know it, with humanism, with liberal arts, with the idealism, without Plato. It could never be done with Aristotle. Plethon is the reason. You got it? Yeah, because he got bored. You got to watch out. When an intellectual gets bored, they get into all kinds of mischief. Okay, so moving right along. Now you got it, right? Now, next image. I mean, this image coming up right here. One mystic, humanist writer living at the time was Pico della Mirandola. 1463 to 1494. He didn't live very long. He explored many philosophical systems popular at this time, beginning with Aristotle and the medieval understanding of his teachings as espoused by the Muslim philosopher Averroes. Yet it was his eventual encounter with the Greek philosopher Plato while in Florence that truly fired his beliefs. From Plato, Pico came to believe that humanity was directly part of the continuum of God, an extension of his radiant divinity by being made in his image. Based on this assertion, Pico taught humanity was able to accomplish more than what was taught by the medieval church at the time. That in fact, no limits or border could be placed upon the human potential, that we could aspire to the greatest of heights, to places that exceed even our current imagination. And he believed God gave us the free will to choose this higher spiritual existence, that we could be as of the angels, but even more than that, that we have realized that the potential within ourselves could do wonderful, great things, deep, steeped, unfathomable depths, and the highest of heights. In a sense, it would be ideas that we even find within the works of William Shakespeare when it comes to who humanity is. This is fascinating, right? Pico's philosophy became central to what would later become defined as humanism during the Renaissance, for his God wished us to think critically about the world around us while appreciating it at the same time. Pico's God wished us to use our intellect, our creativity, our imagination to create a better world here and now. And his God wished us to change, to continually transform ourselves. For Pico taught that change was the one constant in the universe, and to be true to the image of God was change as exemplified by God himself, who presented a dynamic rather than a static universe, a dynamic universe of interactions and relations like Plato, not a static universe of Aristotle, which is dead and ceases to move in the end. Of course, Pico's amazing revelations leading to humanism are directly related to Plethon's Academy. Next image. So we have a few here. In 1484, Pico met Lorenzo de' Medici and Marsilio Ficini in Florence and immediately became close to both of them. It just so happened that on the day Pico met Marsilio Ficino, the exact day, Ficino had published his translations of the works of Plato from Greek into Latin on that exact day. As a result, the encounter with Pico at this place and time was viewed as divine providence at work. Lorenzo de' Medici immediately extended his patronage to Count Pico, faithfully protecting him until his death in 1492. At this point, Pico made himself very acquainted with the philosophy of Plato, an encounter that completely changed his worldview. While he still maintained a respect for Aristotle, Pico now made Plato as the main architect for most of his principles, overarching ideas, only modified here and there by insights gathered by Aristotle. Pretty amazing stuff. Next image. And so these, some more Pico materials, the manuscripts. Next image. And here's how Pico also involved himself into Kabbalah, integrating, which, you know, would make Plethon very proud, because Plethon was also interested in the Kabbalah. And you see here how it works together. Next image. And who is this? This is going to throw you off. Yeah, this is Nicholas Copernicus. Wait, what's he doing here? Well, 1473 to 1543. What? But this is after, right? He's a Polish astronomer. He's one of the earliest of those pioneers to reject the Earth-centered, geocentric universe. Beginning his education at Krakow, Copernicus continued his education in Padua, Italy. Upon Italian soil, Copernicus first came upon ancient Hellenistic and Byzantine thought related to the nature of the cosmos. Copernicus was so determined to learn these mysteries from the Greek East that he taught himself Greek through Theodorus Gaza's grammar. A move from Padua to Bologna, Copernicus came upon the writings of the Byzantine monk and philosopher Basilius Bessarion. So, who's Bessarion? Who was educated in Constantinople before its fall, and who studied under, oh, look at this, the Platonist Gemistos Plethon. Uh-oh. What? Wait. Yeah. In fact, Bessarion, after he became Metropolitan of Nicaea by the Byzantine Emperor John the eighth Paleologos in 1437, accompanied Plethon to Italy in order to bring about a reunion between the Orthodox and Catholic churches, as we saw, so the Byzantine Empire, well, that was left of it, could receive possible help from the Latin West against the advancing Turks. When hopes for reunion began to crumble, Bessarion defected to the Catholic Church, became a cardinal, and lived the rest of his life in Italy, bringing with him his collection of books and manuscripts and creating a center for learning about his palace in Rome, collecting great scholars from all around in the process, including the famed Byzantine scholars George of Trebizond, Theodore Gaza, and John, Areopagus. Both Plethon and Bessarion brought the philosophy of Plato back to the Latin West. So it's not just Plethon now, it's a student Bessarion. And Bessarion, guess who's he's going to teach? That's right, Copernicus. Bessarion sought to figure out ways to systematically bring the philosophies of Plato and Aristotle together, especially within a religious context. Bessarion, as well as other Byzantine scholars, greatly influenced the philosophical world of Copernicus, especially in providing him the Platonic undergirding, which enabled him to dislodge himself of many of his Aristotelian suppositions embedded within Ptolemaic cosmological systems. After concluding his studies in Ferrara, next image, this right here is Bessarion there. I want to show you him. Next image. There's an image from his chapel in Rome where he retired to. Next image, Bessarion. And that's where he lived. And this is where he centered his school of thought, had so much of Plato in it, in Rome. Bringing that idea home. Next image. And you can see some of the mystical philosophy that permeates into the Latin West right here. Next image. So Nicholas, after concluding his studies in Ferrara, receiving there his degree of Doctor of Canon Law in May 1503, Copernicus eventually moved to the Baltic town of Frombork in 1512, and by 1514 proceeded to purchase the northwestern tower within the local fortress, where he set up a makeshift observatory. Here, Copernicus watched the heavens with a critical eye over the years. The culmination of Copernicus's findings were to be published in his own On the Revolution of the Heavenly Spheres in 1543, which, not coincidentally, was also the year of his death. Copernicus feared the reaction to a book that he very well knew directly challenged the Ptolemaic geocentric universe that's supported by Aristotle, and they went so far as to dedicate the work to Pope Paul III, hoping that would at least appease some criticism. According to Copernicus, the Earth moved about the sun in a circle, a Platonic circle, much like the monad, which is the sun, has the radiating circle and the emanations, and not the other way around, believing in the heliocentric universe. It is pivotal to know that the Platonism is very much part of the motivation for Copernicus to have a sun-centered, heliocentric universe. And you can see how it makes sense. Yet Copernicus also adopted many aspects of the Ptolemaic system, including the epicycles, but these epicycles were much smaller and thereby at least a little more accurate. As far as the apparent backward movement of the planets, Copernicus explained that this was merely an optical illusion and that the planets in reality move forward in a consistent manner. For Copernicus, the sun was the center of the universe, not the earth. Yet the earth was the center of gravity and the lunar sphere. Still, for Copernicus, Aristotle's cosmology was no longer valid and based his principles and his ideals, however flawed, on a Platonic universe that he learned in Italy from Bessarion, who is a student of Plethon. Are you getting my point yet? You see the trick? Okay, let's go to the next image. Okay, so here it is. Next image, concentric circles, which leads us to Kepler, who inherited the works of Tycho and adopted his methodology. He adopted Copernicus' idea of heliocentric universe. And of course, what will happen here, oh, you can't make this up. Because of the Catholic Church's treatment of his mother, dying as a result of beatings in connection to her witch trial, he transformed himself into a convinced Platonist. He did. He actually became a Platonist because of how the church, who was so entrenched in Aristotle, treated his mom. I'm serious. Kepler believed Copernicus was correct based upon their shared metaphysical and philosophical convictions that the Greek East retained a better grasp of the reality of the cosmological realm than the Latin West. In other words, their shared religious beliefs rather than scientific inquiry motivated their pursuits, as opposed to the Western embraced Ptolemaic Aristotelian system where the earth was intended to be the center. The Greek embraced Platonist perspective of emanations moving from the monad or the one conceived as the good or God on down to the material realm of the earth, most definitely allowed for the idea of this monad as represented by the one sun. Kepler was convinced, like the Platonists, that God created the cosmos according to an intelligible plan, a rational blueprint that could be realized through knowledge, gnosis. And so for him, the universe itself constituted the emanations proceeding from God, the very reflections of the image of God. According to Kepler, he viewed the Father as represented by the Sun, the stellar sphere as represented by the Sun, S-O-N, and the realm between and moving down to earth as representing the Holy Spirit. Well, doesn't it sound familiar? Yeah, we're back to the same male, female, or androgynous, male, female alignment that you see all the way back in Neoplatonism, and we're going to see this obviously in Plethon as well. Just like Plato and both ancient and Renaissance Neoplatonists, Kepler directly correlated knowledge with light. And so, because the light appeared to originate from the sun, then God, who is all knowing, must be represented by the sun and must also be the center of the universe, not the earth. Kepler also believed that the Bible supported a heliocentric rather than a geocentric universe, quoting from both the Old and New Testaments to support his case in the first work known as the Mysterion. Most especially, the Gospel of John correlated knowledge with light, and then it turned to God as revealed through the Word or the Logos. Kepler also agreed on religious philosophical grounds that Copernicus was correct in his theory that the Earth circled the sun and not the other way around. He also realized Copernicus' conception of circular orbits was fundamentally flawed, and so he looked to the works of Tycho Brahe for a more logical answer, despite the fact that Tycho opposed Copernicus and favored an Earth-centered universe. Taking Tycho's data, Kepler realized that the planets had an elliptical rather than a circular orbit, publishing the result in his conclusions in 1609 work entitled The Motion of Mars. Of course, there still was no exact explanation to just why the planet's orbits were elliptical, and the question that would be solved later on by Sir Isaac Newton. Next image. So here's some images from Kepler. And you see here the Ptolemaic system and Brahe and Copernicus. You can see all laid out here. You don't even have to know Latin to understand that. Next image. Okay. Oh, I just can't make this up. So Strabo, Platon brought the works of Strabo to also with him to the council. Strabo was he was a geographer. He lived in the first century BCE, first century CE, and he had this idea of the map of the world. Now, I do want to tell you that there's something wrong with Strabo's geography. He made the Earth too small. Now, there was a 3rd century BCE librarian from Alexandria, Aristophanes, who calculated the circumference of the Earth, and through looking at the shadows between Alexandria and further down the Nile, measuring this through the light at the same time of day, and figured out it was only about 7-8 kilometers off the circumference of the Earth. So the Greeks did know the Earth as the size it is now. Well, Strabo messes up and it makes the Earth a lot smaller, really small. But this is the form that Plethon brings to the West, who were unfamiliar with Strabo. Next image. So I wrote this out because I want you to see it for yourself. Then in 1474, the Italian astronomer Paolo del Pozzo Toscanelli told King Alfonso V of Portugal that as opposed to sailing all around Africa, it may be quicker and cheaper to simply sail west and end up at the Spice Islands, Hekate and Cipadagu. Toscanelli was born in Florence and was very much in the center of the intellectual renaissance, knowing many of the shapers and makers of this movement, including Brunelleschi, the philosopher, Marsilio Ficino, and Leon Battista Alberti. He was also acquainted with the famed Byzantine intellectual Plethon. Meeting him right here in 1439 while attending the Council of Florence. I want you to see this. I'm reading this because I want you to see this for yourself because I want you to get the names down. Plethon acquainted Toscanelli with the extensive travels, writings, and mappings of the 1st century BC CE Greek geographer Strabo, hitherto unknown in Italy. Now, armed with an expanded knowledge of the world, that it is round, and of course, believing the world was round, as the Romans always asserted, he was able to create a map of the world by 1474. Toscanelli sent this map along with a letter explaining it to his Portuguese correspondent, Fernão Martins, priest of the Lisbon Cathedral, detailing a scheme for sailing westward to reach the Spice Islands in Asia. Fernão Martins delivered his letter to King Alfonso V of Portugal. The original of this letter was lost, but its existence is known through Toscanelli himself, who later transcribed it along with the map and sent it to Christopher, as in Christopher Columbus, who carried them with him during his first voyage to the New World. But Toscanelli had misunderstood the size of the Earth, which resulted in Columbus not realizing initially he had found a new continent. But Alfonso was not interested in the idea. So next image. So this is Toscanelli. So basically, he gets this map so he gets Strabo's map from Plethon, and this map is of the world is too small. I'm going to show you his map. Next image. Looks just like Strabo's, doesn't it? And so what happens is it gets everybody excited because, hey, if the world is that small, then the Spice Islands in India is just a very quick jaunt across the Atlantic to the other side. It made a very small globe. And who took advantage of that? Next image. Christopher Columbus. So Plethon directly or indirectly influenced the voyage of Christopher Columbus, because Columbus, believing Toscanelli's map to be true, and since he was unable to do so himself, convinced them that, hey, this is going to be easy. We're just crossing over the small body of water and we're reaching India or the Spice Islands. And lo and behold, he ran into America instead. So there you have it. Unfortunately, if it wasn't for Plethon, Christopher Columbus would not have been interested, because it was not such an easy, low-hanging fruit. What do you think? Interesting bit. I told you Plethon changes quite a bit, maybe too much. So let's move on to the next image. Yeah, Plethon goes home. After his trip, Plethon was to reside in Mistra for the rest of his life. Many wonder why he would return from a place where he's so highly honored, a place where he was virtually unknown. The answer is that while so many within the Byzantine Empire did not respect him and viewed him as a heretic, when he was at Mistra, he was well known. He was respected. He was beloved. He was a big fish in a small pond. And here he had much influence. He could, in a sense, attempt to create an experiential, idyllic Hellenic world. At Mistra, he was a well-respected member of the Senate and as well as a senior magistrate, next image. Of course, he saw himself uh, mostly as the court philosopher of the despotate, following the ancient traditions that even Plato followed in Syracuse. Much like Socrates, he enjoyed walking about in public for all to see and hear his words as he strolled along the stoa of the agora and made orations to all those who wished to be inspired by his words of wisdom, those who hungered to hear. And much like Socrates, his public information was free for the taking for those who wished to know, who hungered after greater knowledge of the world, of politics, and of course of the spiritual realm. Plethon was frugal and clean in his approach and Spartan in his mindset. And so there you have. But, but, did he do nothing during this time? Um, well, let's look at me for a few moments. You just don't want to leave this guy alone. Okay. His last work was the most controversial. It's known as On the Laws, Nomoi. It was completed only at the very end of his life. He was not to die until 1452 or 54, depending on the version. When he was 90, he seems to have proposed a new, extremely idiosyncratic religion based partly on Persian Zoroastrianism and partly in the old Greek pantheon, where the ancient deities were revived, though more as symbol than anything else, and subordinated to the almighty Zeus. The work included a full liturgy to the Hellenic pagan gods, complete with hymns and prayers in their honor. Unfortunately, much, but not all, of this work was intentionally destroyed after Plethon's death by his shocked rival, Scholarius, now Patriarch of Constantinople in 1460. However, we know much about the general layout and argument through a surviving table of contents, along with a few, actually, you should say, quite a few fragments here and there, since Scholarius did not have the will to destroy all the evidence of this work. He even produced some summaries of sections. So it both exists and not exists, but enough exists for us to know a lot about it. Plethon began by stating that everyone appears to argue about what exactly is the meaning of life. Just what is it? Is it pleasure? Is it wealth? Is it glory? Is it virtue? Is it found within interactions with the material world? Is it found within interactions within the spiritual world, or a little of both? Plethon asserts that we can know what the meaning of life is if we examine the nature of humanity, who we really are in the universe, and how we do that is by examining us within the context of nature, that nature that's all around us, to see how we fit within the puzzle of greater creation, what role we are to be filling in this context. Plethon says that such inquiries will lead us to the realization of the nature of the divine that is infused within the cosmos. Following this introduction, Plato proceeds through a laundry list of philosophical authorities that pondered this question. Here he criticizes both poets and sophists, for the first are focused upon pleasing the ears of their readers, while the second are focused upon elevating themselves and not helping others. Plato declares, he says, both drag the divine down to the more human level and elevate the human to the more divine level according to human measure. So who is one to follow? Those who are the legislators and the philosophers, for they are to pronounce soundly on these matters because they deal with the common good, with the truth as basis of well-being. In general, against the idea of the poets, Plato states that this work comprises theology, next image, according to Zoroaster and Plato, using for the gods recognized by philosophy the traditional names of gods known as the Hellenes, but restoring them from the sense given them by the distortions of poets, which do not precisely conform with philosophy to the sense which does conform to the greatest possible degree with philosophy. As easily deductive, Plato understands the Aristotelians to be the sophists. So he has, as a result, he lists the most important. He gives, as you see here, the 6 lawgivers: Zoroaster, Emulus, Minos, Lycurgus, Ephetos, Numus Pompeius. He gives the 7 ancient sages, and he mentions the Brahmins of India. Oh, here we go. What? Wait, what? So we see here, recognize a little bit of Indic philosophy that is jumping in to his beliefs. Wow. The Magi of Media. So you got Persian. The Curites of Crete. The priests of Zeus at Dodona, the oracles. Palladius, Tiresias, the blind seer. Charon the centaur. Wow. Next image. He also recognizes the 7 sages of ancient Greece. And you can see here, Chalon of Sparta, Solon of Athens, Bias of Priene, Theos of Miletus, right? Cleobulus of Lindus, Pittacus of Mytilene, Mesion of Chine. You have the 8 philosophers: Pythagoras, Plato, Parmenides, Timaeus, Plutarch, Plotinus, Porphyry, Iamblichus, and of course, no Aristotle. Of course, he's not even acceptable from his perspective. There we go. So let's look at me for a few seconds. So he embraces Zoroaster, as you can see. He's very consistent with his earlier period of time, with the theology of light versus darkness. The reason why he has Empulus is because he was the first to introduce the Elysian mysteries to the Athenians, which included the belief in the fundamental immortality of the soul. I think it's so interesting that he is recognizing the founder of these mysteries, right? These pagan mysteries, very popular in ancient times. The Eleusinian mysteries and Eleusis, which are connected to Demeter, the goddess, right? Eumelos was a famous, by the way, Thracian singer and priest of Ceres, who is also noted for bringing the vine to Attica. Of course, obviously, he mentions a few others. I like that he mentioned the Brahmas of India and then so forth. After discussing all these eminent legislators and philosophers, what is very shocking to many is that Plethon now opens with a prayer. But this is not a prayer to a specifically Christian God, but instead to the pagan deities. He says, quote, "Come to us, O gods of learning, whoever and however may you be, ye who are guardians of scientific knowledge and true belief, ye who distribute them to whomsoever you wish, in accordance with dictates of the great Father of all things, Zeus the King. For without you, we should not be able to complete so great a task. But do you be our leader in our reasonings, and grant that this book may have all success to be set as a possession forever before those of mankind who wish to pass their lives, both in private and public, established in the best noble fashion," unquote. What are you guys thinking now? Right? So do you think maybe Plethon is not exactly Greek Orthodox? This is the man who ignites the Renaissance? Wow. Now are you understanding already why this is not taught? A lot. You're seeing why scholars know and it doesn't get into books when it comes to general readings. And yet you can't take them out, but they do. They make up things. Okay. Plethon asserts in position that the gods are more blessed than humanity. With that said, they are only the source for good and never evil, for they provide what is best for us. These gods exist out of time and space. The gods are many, a plurality, organized in degrees. Plethon makes it clear that philosophical existence of a pantheon of gods, but also adds that they are all subsumed under a supreme sovereign who contains all that exists, including these gods under himself, and yet at the same time is always in a perpetual undivided condition. Conveniently, Plethon calls this monad the one emanating the many by the title of Zeus. This Zeus is unbegotten and also self-engendered, sounding just like Plato, Plotinus, and Proclus. This Zeus is both essence, ousia, and existence, praxis. It is identical. Let's go to the next image. So we have here the prayer here that I just talked about, and I have the manuscript right there, so you can see where it is. Yeah, it survived. Next image. So you do have Zeus. By the way, I want to thank John Apsopas for these great images here. So here you have a Zeus, and you can see he's the ineffable one, the one itself, supremely one, purely one, super essential, pre-eternal, the good itself, Father, self-Father, first Father, the principle of all things, that supreme God who in the bringing of our fathers is called Zeus, is supremely good, lacking no perfection to be the best possible. Next image. You have Plethon say, alone of all beings, Zeus knows no bounds, since there is nothing that can limit him, for something can be limited only by its own cause, but Zeus is too great to be bounded and remains eternally and perfectly identical to himself. Next image. You have, of course, the hierarchy of 22 super celestial gods below Zeus. They are eternal, outside of time. They correspond to the Platonic forms or ideas. They are intellects. They are Olympian, having power to emanate immortal beings. And of course, you can see the levels there. Next, the order of emanations. Next image. Of course, you have Poseidon. Poseidon represents the idea of an idea. So the oldest son of Zeus, of the monad, is described as having a mother, but emanating directly, not having a mother, but emanating directly from Zeus, and is called Poseidon, who acts in the same manner as the Logos of Christianity, of the Trinity, being the force of creation behind the heavens and the earth. And I must add, there is something similar to the Chaldean second intellect here. And so his form itself or idea itself, right? So he's a master of ideas. Next image. And it's interesting here. Third in order is Hera, who is the divine creatrix of the material world, the type of matter that is indestructible, of course. Plethon's Hera mirrors the Chaldean Hekate, the third power in both form and function in many ways. Now, according to Plethon, it is through Zeus and Hera that the other gods, demigods, and spirits are created. The eldest of the heavenly gods is created by Zeus, and Hera is Helios, a transitional figure who is in charge of the direct heavens of the physical realm, hence the sun. And as you may guess, the source of all mortal life on earth, since without the Helios, the Greek word for sun, there is no life cycle. Of course, you have others here. The overseer, let's go through these. Next image. So they have the first pentatad, the greatest kinds. And you see here under that first is Apollo, Artemis, Hephaestus, Dionysus, and Athena. Let's go next image. Apollo is the idea of identity, governs identity or sameness, source of harmony, responsible for justice and wisdom, bestows health, body harmony, leader of the muses, invokes to inspire love in divine beauty. Next image. Artemis is the idea of difference, rules and governs diversity and differentiation, multiplies unity of ideas into particular ideas, into individual things belonging to them, into their physical parts, gives our bodies moderation, power, strength, and soundness, gives us immortal souls courage and self-control, invokes for aid in avoiding errors and for guidance in living rightly. Next image. You got Hephaestus, the idea of rest, governs stability and permanence in temporal reality, leader of the super celestial gods after Poseidon. Next image. You have Dionysus, the idea of active change, creates motion characteristic of souls which have their own goals. A creator of rational souls, of celestial gods, daemons, and humans, seeks own perfection coming from source. Next image. You have Athena, other cause motion, governs forms and processes inseparable from matter, separates us from all that is superfluous and useless. Next image. You have the second pentad, the creators of immortal souls. You have Atlas, you have Titus, Dion, Hermes, and Pluto. Next image. Atlas, the idea of the heavens, and myth Atlas supports the heavenly vault, governs celestial bodies and its children. Next image. You have Titanus, idea of planets, emanates the seven planetary gods. Next image. He also grants everlasting life. Dion, idea of fixed stars, emanates zodiac and other fixed stars. Next image. Hermes, idea of earthly daemons, emanates the daemons. Daemons are mediators between gods and mortals. Daemons are good. Next image. The third pentateuch is elemental goddesses, Rhea, Leto, Hekate, Tethys, and Hestia. Next. Rhea emanates the everlasting elements, goddesses because emanates matters, ideas of things without souls. Next image. Leto, idea of fire, warm, separation, perpetual motion, substance of vehicles of souls. Next, vitality. Next image. Hekate, cool, connection, rectilinear motion, terminates higher mobility, rising. Next image. Tethys, idea of water, wet, dissolution. Next image. Hestia, dry, condensation, immobile. Next image. And the fourth one, of course, the illegitimate children of Zeus. So kind of move on through this. And of course, you can see here, let's go through these just quickly so you can see them. So yeah, Kronos, idea of perishable form. Next one. Aphrodite, idea of perishable matter. Next one. Pan, idea of animal life. Next one. Demeter, idea of plant life. Next one. The core, the idea of human body, responsible for the mortal part of humans. And thus, Pluto and Persephone together create human beings comprising immortal soul and mortal body. Connects us to Olympus and Tartarus. I think this is very interesting. Next one. And of course, you have the various celestial gods. Next one. Earthly daemons, which we talked about. Once again, they have true beliefs but do not know the reasons. The legitimate children of Poseidon and Hera execute orders of the gods. Next. And here are some hymns that we see that Plethon has. O noble children of all father being Zeus, you govern us with justice under his command, so let us never fail to have you for our guides, obeying laws that are both right and dear to you, as in our power, the only laws to rule us well. But you, O gods, direct us, straightening our minds, which you have made with nature similar to yours, wherever grant to us good order in our lives, but most of all with you to celebrate great Zeus. Next image. You also have a hymn to Hera. August 1, goddess Hera, daughter of the great Zeus, O thou whose husband is Poseidon, thou who art most fair, the mother of the gods within the sky, the cause of matter and the seat here for the forms, dispenser of all powers, and among the rest, what leads us into excellence and all that's fair, you bring together laws for everything from which the multitude eternally comes forth. You grant us to live well, to virtue brings us graciously. And this is, again, from the Plethon writings. Pretty overt there that Scholarius allowed to survive. Next image. So it is in the actions suitable to their kinship with the gods that we come, after many other capable teachings, to show people their happiness. The aim of our book being to make those who listen to our lessons as happy as a human is allowed to be. I want to think about this one. I personally, it is in a sense the nutshell, so to speak, that what is the aim of life? Why are we here? And Plethon makes it clear it should be to be happy. Happiness, enjoying things, not struggling, not being judged like he oftentimes was, but to live a good life. For him, he chose a simple life. That was for him. He did, but that was his personality. But he sought after personal happiness. Isn't that what we all want? Next image. And of course, ethics, how to be excellent, prudence, justice, fortitude, courage, self-control, moderation. He had his own idea what the happiness is, but he did esteem such an idea. Next image. So, well, there you have it. And we're thinking, okay, let's take it down for a split second. We're almost done here. We're pulling in, right? But here we go. So the overseership of creation is divided in half, he says, with the Olympians ruling the eternal realm of the heavens, and that which is immoral, in a group known as Tartarians ruling the temporal material realm, immortal, which is mortal. And I need some water. The gods are also symbols, divine signs leading to those inclined towards perfection and completion with the spiritual order that permits the human soul to rise via reincarnation. Yes, he's teaching reincarnation through successive physical bodies toward the very gods themselves. Ultimately, for Plethon, the universe, with its dualism of Zoroastrianism, its Olympian hierarchy of the Chaldean Oracles, its ideals of an overarching monad from Neoplatonism, is perfect, complete, outside of time, and eternal. In one of these fragments surviving from the Nomoi, Plethon broke with convention and proposed that the existing Julian calendar needed radical alterations in order to correspond more directly with the rotations of the Earth, as well as the corresponding movement of the planets. It is not a secret that his special attention to making sure the mathematical, stellar, and planetary calculations were precise was also directly related to newfound reverence for the gods of antiquity. He declares as follows: concerning the services of worship for the gods, it is advisable to use the natural months and years, with the months being calculated according to the moon, and the years by the solstices of the sun, beginning anew at each winter solstice when the sun has gone furthest away from us, and begins anew again its progression towards us. The day of the old and the new moon has been determined by those who are most experienced in astronomy as a day on which the moon is joined with the sun. The next day is new moon day, which begins at midnight immediately after the conjunction of the two gods, the sun and the moon. From this point are calculated all remaining days of the month, the full months having 30 days, the hollow months having 1 day less. The evening of each night is reckoned as part of the preceding day, the dawn as part of the following day, and the midnight marks a division between the 2 days. While Scholarius believed Plethon literally believed in this system, one of his students, Bessarion, who we already met, viewed this work as also having a great metaphor application. When Plethon died, Bessarion wrote this, by the way, he wrote that he would join the Olympian gods, unquote, adding that Plato's soul had been reborn in Plethon. So, so Bessarion, who we've met, who's a student, who influenced Copernicus, who's now living in Italy, says, hey, he's gone to the Olympian gods when he dies. That's like, okay, well, there we go. Yeah. For Plethon, the declining Byzantine state should not hearken to models of ancient Rome for the sake of its political revitalization, nor cower to the theistic mandates imposed by a Christianity so steeped in dogmatic superstition and contradiction, where patriarchs, bishops, and lay people alike argue over moralistic minutiae, polluted by a hubristic folly to actually believe they could act, even violently, as representations of God's will. Yeah, I wrote that. Did God care if priests were married or not? Did God approve of the veneration of images or not? Did God believe the Eucharistic bread should be leavened or unleavened? Did God reject or approve the addition of filioque and the Son to the creed? Plethon, having been in the thick of such debates while growing up, and especially on his reunification tour of Italy, where supposedly the Greek East was willing to join in union with the Latin West under the overseership of the Pope in Rome, which, as I said before, didn't happen, was weary of the whole thing. He was sick and tired of every party or embassy claiming God was on their side and not on the other side, and felt there needed to be more of an Olympian distancing of the deity from the petty affairs and intrigues of humanity. Plethon reached out for a larger deity, a God beyond such pettiness, and he found this God not within Christianity, but in its precursors, in the rational deity of Plato, who was the source of all, who was the light shining in the darkness, and who was the good. Placing the name of Zeus upon this deity as a matter of convenient labeling, much in the way of Heraclitus of Ephesus, who saw this divine source as Zeus and not Zeus, Plethon then enrolled the host of other gods as subordinates below this overarching deity, but they were symbols of more philosophical categories than personal deities. For Plethon, then, there needed to be a return to the Hellenistic ideals of antiquity, of the glories of ancient Greece and their philosophical gods, yet all within the framework of his Neoplatonic sensibilities, mixed here and there with other perspectives gained throughout his inquiries in the East, amongst those who are the Persians, amongst Judaism, within Judaism, mystical Judaism, in Islam, especially Sufism, and of course, even in the Indic philosophy. Many spoke and still speak about a mystery school created by Plethon at Mistra, but not much is known about it, except perhaps a few rumors that could be rooted more in prejudicial attacks upon Plethon rather than reality. For instance, one story told how his students at Mistra had begun to pray before the statues of Greek deities at Mistra. Without mention of specifically Plethon, we know from the writings of Gennadius Galerius the existence of a pagan circle thriving in the Peloponnese Peninsula, calling themselves the Brotherhood of Phratria. In Plethon's On the Laws, he discusses how those who became initiated in his revised Hellenistic religion were now to be understood as brothers. Also, in one of his hymns in On the Laws, after acknowledging the gods, heroes, and ancestors, Plethon continues by adding those he calls his comrades, sunophoroi, companions, fellow inhabitants, fellow citizens, friends, and significantly brothers. But of the legacy, I have one more twist. That wasn't enough. One more twist. But the legacy of George Gemistus Plethon would continue, not in the Greek Byzantine East, but rather the Latin West, above all in Renaissance Italy, where his works were both read and well circulated, and where many of his philosophies, even the more arcane religious ones, became part of the very fabric of the intelligentsia and the philosophical elite. As I mentioned before, even the Cosmo de' Medici was inspired by him and created the Academy at Florence in his honor. This academy, under the direction of Marsilio Ficini, would eventually translate every one of Plato's works from Greek into Latin, undergirding the philosophical thought behind humanism. In addition, as a very certain nod to Plethon, Ficini would also translate many works by the Neoplatonic philosophers, starting with the Enneads of Plotinus. Here it is, my conclusion. Finally, in 1465, with a certain Sigismondo Mandolfo Battista of Rimini, this man entered Mistra with the Venetian army, and he removed the body of this beloved philosopher from his very Spartan tomb and brought it back to his home. Next image. And so there, at Rimini, next image, Rimini, Italy, not in Mistra, but in this building, and not in elaborate, sorry, not in a simple Spartan grave, but an elaborate Spartan grave. George Gamestus Plethon is housed here. Next image. This is the grave of Gamestus Plethon. The inscription says it all. The inscription upon this monument, now in Italy, in a very significant location, states what the Italians believed at that time. Quote, the greatest philosopher of his time. That's right. The greatest philosopher of his time. And yet, you can't even find him in a World Civilization A textbook today. Let that sink in. Here's a man, one man. Yes, you have the secondary causes. You have events ready for this change. But there's no question that Plethon is the one who ignites it. He's at the right place, at the right time, bringing an idea that Florence and Tuscany and Italy in general was ready for, but did not have. And that legacy created much of the Italian Renaissance, how you understand it, and led to so many different ideas and beliefs and perspectives that brings us very much into the modern world. I make a proposition, and I hope that many of you who are listening today do the same, is that we need to bring him back. Bring him back into the conversation. Bring him back into the academic discourse, but better still, bring him back into the classroom. He may be controversial, but what he did really did happen in an evidential sense and has changed every one of us in the Western world. Thank you much.